All right.
You talked in the past about wanting to bring in players that fit your ethos and the culture of the building. Now that you've been with Raheem for a full year, has that ethos changed a little bit now that you're trying to incorporate the new coaching staff? How has it changed from the previous coaches to this one?
Well, we look at everything and every single year, and we're all about we're process driven. So we're always focusing on the process, and we're always looking for ways to adapt and improve. And so when we look back at and have our after action reports, so how can we adjust these areas? So I would say yes, we're always evolving. And when we talk about ethos, it's about bringing in the right types of players and players with the right makeup. And that's the cool thing about being here at Indy. We had 4 hours of interviews yesterday. We have college scouts that spend a lot of time on these players to figure out that part. Are these guys going to be the right fits? Because we feel like we have a good culture and we have a good locker room in those areas, and we want to make sure we're adding really good players, but they got to fit that part. But to answer your question, with Raheem, and anytime we bring in new coaches or new staff, we're always trying to evolve and adapt as best as we can.
Terry, your time with the Saints, they didn't get a successor behind the factor in your decision.
I see your shirt. What's that? Is that Mardi Gras or something on your shirt? What is?
Saints Party Podcast.
Okay, got it.
Did that factor into your decision with last offseason having a quarterback for the present, but also for a quarterback for the future in regards to the draft?
Yeah. Look, that's critical. At the end of the day, when you talk about building a team and building it the right way, you got to have, it's the most important position in pro sports, in my opinion. It's the most important thing. And the way, if you look at the history of the drafts, the way it works, the last time we had as many quarterbacks as we had last year was 2020. That draft, when you had those quarterbacks that came out of there, and then you can have a draft where you don't get a starting quarterback out of it. So you just have to make sure when you see a quarterback that you believe can be a future franchise player, you have to do it. And that's the vision for that, and that's how you have to operate.
Terry, with that being said about quarterbacks, how close is the NFC South as a whole to being more competitive with your guy with Bryce Young?
I think it's competitive. I mean, you look at the teams in the division. You just said it with Bryce Young, with ours. I mean, you look at every team. It's not when you play those games, those in-division games. Those are hard games. Those teams know you well, and those are tough, competitive games. So I think we have a very competitive division.
Terry, when it comes to the backup quarterback position, do you feel like Kirk could be a good mentor in that role for Penix?
Well, look, Kirk handled that really well at the end of the season, and obviously Kirk's he's a really talented player. He's a great man, all those things. So, and again, he handled that role well at the end of the season. That's the plan at this point.
Terry, we didn't ask you about the 14 players from the University of Georgia who are at the combine and 2 from Georgia Tech. In the past, you talked about putting up peaches on the board. You got another 25 players from high schools in Georgia. Just what is that like for having fertile local ground for your local day, kids to scout and maybe help out your team out?
Yeah, a lot of good players. We actually met with some of those Georgia players last night, and a lot of really good players. Like you said, not just the University of Georgia, who's obviously one of the best teams in the country. They've done an unbelievable job. And then also just being from Georgia. I love youth sports and high school sports and all that, and getting to get out and see those young about getting to spend time with those players.
Are y'all still doing the peach thing?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We always know that those players that are our hometown guys. Yes, sir.
Do you still believe that Kirk can be an effective quarterback in this league? And how much did that injury, I think he said he had a shoulder, how much did that play a role in having a second?
Look, Kirk was on the injury report leading into the Denver game, and he wasn't on the injury report. Outside of that, we're only aware of that particular week. We talked about it when that change was made. It was a football decision. It was based off football decision. There wasn't anything injury related. I'm sorry. Can you? I can't quite. That's a good question, and I think you always have to be adapting to the landscape of the league. You're always adapting, and yet there are always core values that you have, and up front, you have to be good up front. When you walk in there and you got a big physical offensive line and you have a big physical defensive line, it's going to always it's going to make a difference. So I don't know those areas, but up front, you got to be big and physical. Yeah, I don't know. I would say maybe some of the things that are going on in the college game as you see it, and you see those things making their way to the pro game, and how you have to adapt in those ways. But again, we're always going to be adaptive, but you better be good up front.
So if I were to talk to you Monday, and I said, hey, was it a successful week? And you say yes, because of what? What makes this, in your eyes, a successful week?
Well, we're here to gather information. And that's what we're doing. We're spending a lot of time, as we talked earlier, about all these interviews, these formal interviews with the players. We're to gather information in that way. Usually you can spend time and see people face to face and talk about your roster and those things, and so you want to have that. But it's really about, we're still in the gathering information phase. So I would say it's a successful week if we go in with a plan to gather as much information as we can, and that's what makes it successful.
More important, 40, the medicals, or the interviews?
You said the 40. The medical. So the medical is critical, right? So I'd put getting all that medical information is really number one in that. The 40, nowadays you can have a guy that blazes the 40 but doesn't play fast, and then vice versa. So we focus more on play speed. We also get different numbers nowadays with the GPS and all those things. We can really measure those things in different ways outside of just running a 40-yard dash. So we look at those numbers because you do have the apples to apples. What's up, man? So we look at all those numbers, but I would say the medical's critical, not just the workouts. We're going to look at the other numbers, and the interviews are critical. You're spending time with those guys, and you think about, when you think back to different interviews, sometimes you get that blink reaction. Just spending 18 minutes with a guy, you really get a good feel for him, and vice versa. So it's all a part of the process, but the medical is critical.
Finally for me, when it comes down to it, you mentioned the GPS speed, the medical. Can they play ball? Is it like the gut, the determining factor when you pull the trigger on whoever you guys select?
Well, like I said, we have the board set right now from our February meetings, and that's just with the college scouts, boots on the ground. They spent all that time on the road gathering all the information that they can. They know these players really well. They've been scouting them for a long time, and you set the board based off football. Now you have to say discipline. As we continue to gather the information, we assess the intelligence, we meet with the players and really get the background and the makeup, we get the medical. All those things are going to factor in, but it still comes down to football, and that's where we always have to focus on.
Terry, for the last several years, the belief is that the running back has been a little devalued, but we've also been a high pick on the running back last year. The Eagles, the Ravens, the Packers invested heavily. Do you see the running back coming back in preference, or you kind of pick quarterback?
Man, we have a lot of respect for that position, and man, with Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, our running back room, I wouldn't trade it with anybody. And so we think it's critical, and it depends on who the player is. And probably the reason it hasn't been is because when you look at drafts, there's certain positions that usually only the hit rate is really high in certain rounds and it's really low in other rounds. Running backs, historically, you can hit at any point. There's an undrafted free agent running back or a running back that shows up at a rookie camp that ends up being a good player every year. So that's probably why some people would say it's been devalued. But then there's certain players, like the teams you're talking about, like a Bijan Robinson, that are just completely different animals, and they're just take the position off of it. Bijan's a special player.
You've drafted a couple of corners that are under 5'10" over the years.
Yeah.
That's a rarity. What are the traits that you look for in the evaluation process of a draft as to what makes a corner under 5'10" a viable guy to draft?
Yeah, good question. And there's always rules and measurables and things that places you don't want to reach. But at the corner position, what are the critical factors? Your cover talent. Can you play coverage? Can you tackle? And can you take the ball away? And so if you have a player that is a shorter player at whatever, but do you believe in him as a tackler? Do you believe he can cover? And can he play bigger? So even though despite his size, because you also have some bigger corners that don't play big if they're not tackling anybody and they can't go up and make a play on the ball. Doesn't matter. So we more assess. We're going to look at the measurables, and you want to have an awareness of it so we know that this guy doesn't fit the prototype of this position, but then it goes back to football. Can he cover? Can he tackle? And can he make a play on the ball? So that competitiveness, that makeup is critical.
In an ideal world, do you also hope that
No doubt, and not just a return game, but something like in this days, whether you're a gunner, whether you're a vice, like you always, that's another phase of the game that's a critical phase. And so every player that we bring in, outside of your interior linemen or your O line and D line, you have to be able to do something in the kicking game. You want to go?
Sorry, a couple years now into the NIL era, how has that sort of impacted the way that you evaluate players based on tolerance for adversity and all those things?
You know what's really interesting about that? Now when you look at players, you're used to looking at a player's profile and you see he's been at this school 4 years. Or it was more unique to see a player that's transferred. But now you can look at a player, we were talking to a player last night that's been to 3 different schools, and he's 25 years old, married with 2 kids. So it's just a different level where you're used to seeing these 20-year-olds that only played 3 years at one school. What I would say the scouts do a really good job of, because the challenge that you have now is you have different, when a scout goes into a school and they're gathering information about a player that team has had them for 3 years, they recruited them, they've had them all those years. Now that's not the same, and so you're kind of piecing it together and getting information from people who didn't have them for as long, so that it makes it a little more challenging for the scouts. But ultimately, we still have to figure out a way to nail those makeups, figure out that part of it. You still want to know why. Why did a player leave and go to different schools? And so you want to answer those questions. Again, it's the same thing in high school, honestly, now. Like, again, we talked to a player that's been in multiple high schools and moved around. And so it's just a unique landscape that we're still figuring out, but we still have to make sure we focus on the makeup. And I would say our scouts do a really good job of that. Thanks. Yeah, whether it's Kirk Cousins or any other player, we have to really look at how is this going to help our team and how is this going to affect the Atlanta Falcons. And so not just with Kirk, with anybody, and all those decisions we make, that's what we have to look at. What's right for this football team.
What internally is y'all's evaluation so far?
Yeah, look, Kyle's a really talented player. He's done some really good things, and you can see, man, you can make a highlight tape and see all the good things that he's done. And we talked about that at the end of the season. We know there's a really high expectation for him. And so where we stand at this point, where Kyle, in his mind, this offseason, I'm going to do everything I can do to make sure I'm effective and I'm helping this team win. And the same with all of us in the building, with myself and everyone in the building, just like any other player. We're pouring into our players and making sure we're doing everything we can do. Again, I said after the season that when you take a player that high, we know there's a expectation, probably an unreal expectation for all those players, but we believe that Kyle's going to put everything he can do into it to be the best player he can for us, and we're going to do the same for him. I don't know where those things come from, but we keep those things private. With any player, we're always, whether we're talking to the representation, so much respect for Mike McCartney, Kirk Cousins, all that, but we're going to keep those things private. Like, we're not going to talk about with any communication with them or with anybody else on our team. We just have to do what's right for the Atlanta Falcons, and so I said after the season, that's where we stood at that point, and we just always have to do what's right for the Atlanta Falcons. It is unique. No, it is unique with that. So with that, there just has to be a high level of communication, and anything that happens, obviously everybody has to be on the same page with it. So we just have to handle that. But so much respect for obviously Kirk, Mike McCartney, but we'll just keep all those things private.
All right, thanks, guys.
Good. Thank you.